Celebrating a cornerstone alliance, the U.S. Vice President wraps up his trip to India, warning of a very dark time for humanity if India and the U.S. fail to cooperate. We'll ask what's really driving the Trump administration's interest in South Asia's leading economy, and how will that shape dynamics with other major powers. I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmakers are the U.S. and India. Well, U.S. Vice President JD Vance and his family departed from Jaipur on Thursday, praising the prospect of selling more energy and defense equipment to India. Well, Vance stressed that the Washington-Delhi relationship will actually determine whether this century will bring light or darkness to the people. Some may see that as an exaggeration, but they are two of the world's biggest economies, so their trade agreements matter. Still, in the complex geopolitical context of Asia, including tensions with China, any deal needs to be very carefully crafted. Here's a look.
With the US global trade war in full swing, could India emerge as a stronger partner with the US and benefit from Trump's attempt at trade reorganisation? The Trump administration thinks so, as US Vice President JD Vance concludes a 4-day trip with his family to India. At the start of his trip, which was mostly personal and only part government business, the US Vice President met with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, following grand red carpet welcomes. New Delhi hopes to secure relief from US tariffs during the current 90-day pause on their implementation, which is set to end on July 9. Following talks, US Trade Representative Jamison Greer confirmed in a statement that terms of reference for future trade negotiations with India have been finalized. JD Vance also highlighted the benefits to both nations that could occur.
Of course, America is blessed with vast natural resources and an unusual capacity to generate energy. So much that we want to be able to sell it to our friends like India. We believe your nation will benefit from American energy exports and expanding those exports. You'll be able to build more, make more, and grow more, but at much lower energy costs.
But future negotiations are tricky. India sends more goods to the US than to any other country. But Donald Trump's distaste for trade deficits meant India was set to face 27% tariffs in the White House's reciprocal tariffs list. Trump has himself criticized Modi in the past, labeling him the tariff king. India's farming sector, for instance, relies heavily on subsistence farming compared to the US's industrialized output. India's leaders will have to balance the US's demands for freer trade and lower tariffs with the needs of a highly disruptive farming community if they perceive that any agricultural deals fall too far in favor of the US. But there are those in India who think a reorganisation of the US relationship could be a big win for India too, especially as they share a common rival in the region, China.
If Chinese imports are subject to 125% duty in most of the sector, China will have no other option but to vacate the US market. If China vacates the US market in some of the segments like textile or footwear, they have a share of more than 25% of the US market. That market will be available to the competing countries, and India in all these sectors is a competitor of China. So we will be definitely benefited by that.
Despite President Trump's harsh and pointed criticism of Modi's tariffs, the two leaders share a close and friendly bond that is openly visible during various state visits.
I believe that if India and the United States work together successfully, we are going to see a 21st century that is prosperous and peaceful. But I also believe that if we fail to work together successfully, the 21st century could be a very dark time for all of humanity.
And behind JD Vance's tough rhetoric is a soft spot. His own wife, Usha Vance, is the daughter of Indian immigrants to the United States. With the President and Vice President each having their own reasons for feeling strongly but warmly of India, could India's position as a large economy and regional rival to China work in its favour? And could India be one of the first major economies to benefit directly from coming to the table and negotiating in Trump's ongoing trade war?
Well, joining me now to debate the U.S.-India relationship and its consequences are, from Kolkata, State Executive Member of the ruling BJP, Shishir Bajoria. From St. Petersburg, Florida, Republican strategist and lawyer, Amanda Maki. And from New Delhi, International Affairs Professor at Jindal Global University, Sriradha Datta. Thank you all so much for being with me. Amanda, I'll start with you. So after Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard's visit to India a few weeks ago, it's pretty clear that the U.S. doesn't just see India as a trade partner, but as a strategic geopolitical partner as well. So explain, if you can, the U.S. positioning here and why it prioritizes India as kind of the partner in Asia.
Well, I think that obviously China looms large in the background here. You know, it is strategic to be so closely tied with India when you are going after China the way that President Trump is. I believe that Modi has established a good relationship with the United States over the last decade, whether it was with President Biden or President Trump's first administration. He was one of the first foreign leaders to visit President Trump in his second term. And I think President Trump is reciprocating. Certainly, JD Vance, the vice president, is reciprocating because they believe India is so critical strategically, as you mentioned. But really, right now, we are in the throes of a major tariff fight. And he wants to make sure, President Trump wants to make sure that that relationship is solidified while Modi continues to try to assuage and acquiesce the United States with reducing some tariffs. Although President Trump and his trade representative have said that it is not enough. India is still very protectionist about its agricultural products, and the tariffs are still, he views India as the tariff king, as he has said.
Fair enough. Let me ask Shishir, because you've also described this as part of a larger plan, J.D. Vance's visit being part of a larger plan. I'm assuming you mean its larger Asia-wide plan to what? Isolate China a little more?
Just let me go back a little. You set the tone. The whole thing starts 20th of January, was the day President Trump was inaugurated. Now, from that day, if you see, the very first meeting that I could see of the new Trump administration was between Secretary of State Rubio and the External Affairs Minister of India, Dr. Jaishankar. That in diplomacy and international affairs, these little signals, they speak a million words. Now, the very first meeting, and then the position of our External Affairs Minister in the swearing in, these are all indications. Then was Prime Minister Modi's visit to DC on the 13th of February, and the way the two got along. Yes, President Trump has always called India because of the tariffs. I will take that point. But, and then you have mentioned that the National Intelligence Director, Tulsi Gabbard's visit to New Delhi and her participation in the Raisina dialogue. Then, I mean, there are many other visits. Just to mention, one is the Assistant Trade Rep, Brandon Lynch, who was here for nearly a week.
Right, so the relationship has been developing. I mean, there have been very significant visits going forward. But just very quickly, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Okay, you showed the picture of Trump won the Howdy Modi in Houston event. That really set the tone. Okay. I was there myself. I was the spokesperson for the party. And the atmosphere and the way, the body language of President Trump, it, again, said a million words.
Okay, let me ask Sriradha, because if we look specifically at the geopolitical relationship, trade aside right now, how much is it about China? And if you can, kind of explain India and China's actual relationship. You wouldn't say it's really collegial. There's a lot of competition there. Some of it may be cynical, if I can use that word. So how much does it matter to India to have that relationship with Washington, to kind of see how much leverage they can both have over China going forward?
I do agree that China is a factor. There is no doubt about that. But I don't think that's the only reason that India and New Delhi and Washington is coming closer. Of course, we know about Quad and Indo-Pacific, and the fact that a lot of the international movement is happening towards our part of the world, and which is where India, with the fact that India is now a 4.5 trillion economy, the kind of growth rate, the kind of market that it offers. There's so many that India offers. So clearly, both the strategic partnership, the defense partnership, every aspect of it is, I think, it's a mutual faith in each other. I think we just spoke about the personal touch that the two leaders have. But that apart, I think, ever since the nuclear the energy deal that we signed, we've seen Washington and DC come together, and we've seen the technology breakthrough that happened under President Biden. That was certainly a strong point in the bilateral relationship. So yes, China is a factor, and for both, for DC as well as for New Delhi. But that's not the only factor that makes it work. I think both the democracies are very, very committed to working on the same values, the same norms and standards that they want to set in the international order, which
Then
of course is being upset by China.
talk a little bit more then about this defense strategy, though, because fine, you can see that as cooperation and it's building a good relationship between these two partners, but it can easily be seen as quite antagonistic to other partners in Asia. We mentioned China, but Pakistan is also there.
Yes, that's always been a friction point between India and USA. That, I mean, everybody is aware of it. We are speaking in the aftermath of a very, very dastardly act that took place in Pahalgam in Kashmir just little more than 24 hours ago. So it is pretty chilly, the relationship that, and we've seen the kind of, for the first time ever, India's, put on hold the Indus Water Treaty. India's never done that earlier, despite many acts of hostility. And the Pakistan, as we know, has always used tools of terror to reach out to India, which is simply unacceptable. And I think India has made that very clear. And we've always seen through all of this, USA for the last so many decades has continued to support Pakistan through this. But I think there has been a change in tone in the last couple of years. We've seen that during President Biden. We saw a very, very empathetic message that President Trump sent us post this, Pahalgam terror attack. And of course, the fact that India and USA is working on the terrorism cooperation. I think that's a huge, important part of the bilateral cooperation that we have. So there is a bit of synergy on Pakistan just now. There was a wide gap on Pakistan while we were converging on others. I would say that we are now closing in on that gap.
Well, let me ask Amanda then what message you think the way this relationship is growing sends to other partners, particularly in Asia. And again, Pakistan and China being the two major players on India's border. Do you fear at all that it could prove more antagonistic than productive?
It could. It certainly could. And you see China already coming out and saying there will be retribution for countries that partner and are allied with the United States in this trade war. Look, this is about the US and it's about China. And that is by and large what you're reading and seeing and hearing about. This is a war between the two countries. And make no mistake, what President Trump is trying to do and has tried to do is to box China in. And so if he uses strategically his partners like India, for example, and certainly, I think the relationship with India has been the most generous and the most productive of relationships. And I think that actually speaks to the two individuals we're talking about here, President Trump and Prime Minister Modi. They are very similar, actually. Prime Minister Modi's father, brought him into the tea business, and he was, in a way, he was a businessman kind of like President Trump. And so I think they both come from a similar background, but they both also understand what is at stake for both their countries. And if it means India has a role, a significant role here, as President Trump tries to squeeze out China, so be it. And Prime Minister Modi has done everything in his power to really build this relationship. And make no mistake, JD Vance taking his major trip across the sea to visit India, having his Indian American wife and his children dressed appropriately and dressed in culturally appropriate clothing, those types of things. I mean, I think it just brings even more depth to this trip and the meaning of this trip for the United States and India's relationships.
Okay. I wanted to ask you, Shashir, about the issue of trade, specifically the U.S. saying that the India-U.S. relationship in trade is about fairness and reciprocity. But these are not equal partners here, let's be honest. One is firmly in the developing economy territory. The other is the most powerful developed economy in the world. And especially when you're looking at trying to equalize trade in agricultural projects, with the discontent of so many Indian farmers, it's very difficult to determine what's really fair. And India risks further alienating farmers that already have legitimate gripes. Does that not worry you?
Look, let's talk of the India-US trade relationship. Just stick to trade. Yes, you've described it well. We are a developing economy. We have come a long, long way. At the moment, number 5 to be number 3 pretty soon. And America, USA is by far the pole in the ladder. It's in the pole position. Now, it's not just the agri issue on the two countries' relationship. MSME, the medium and small scale, is also an issue because this is a very big, big in numbers. It's a big employment generator. Now, what will happen? The way I see it, there's a will for the two countries to work together. President Trump has called out India, and there's no doubt he's called very clearly as, I didn't hear the word tariff king, but yes, he's called out India on tariff every time. But the way I see, again, the diplomatic signals, while he has been belligerent with other countries, I'm using the word belligerent, with India, it's not so. Because I think President Trump and his administration also see that with India, the negotiation will take time. But we will reach a goal. And I think in Vice President JD Vance's visit, his speech to the Indian American Chamber of Commerce from Jaipur, he made it very clear that he expects the two countries to get together on the trade, but it will take time because both are hard negotiators.
Yeah, but then let me ask Srirata, okay, so if Shashir's argument is that Trump has not been, quote, belligerent with India the way he arguably has been with many other countries, is that not because India has acquiesced more? And does that really work in favor of the Indian people? I mean, is it right, for example, to be focusing on defense and energy when India already has a defense sector, as well as the agricultural sector that, again, hypersensitivity, legitimate, I'd say, sensitivity with the farmers there. How much is America looking at benefiting the wider American public at the cost of the Indian public?
So far as the defense is concerned, while India has started its Make in India and the very baby steps, but at the same time, we've also had external partnership on our defense and military ties. And what we've been able to achieve with the US is, of course, a substantial part of that relationship. But coming back to the trade and the tariff issues, I think while we know that we have a 45 billion surplus with US, and that's probably one area. So it's not going to be a small item that US is going to look at. But on the agriculture, the point that you made is absolutely correct that we are not going to, our domestic factors are far more important. While the US strategic partnership is certainly very vital and critical to India, that the domestic side of the agriculture is very different from what the agriculture sector in US is. we have, a subsistence kind of farming that takes place. Most of the small holdings, largest part of our, the largest substantial numbers of farmers are less than 1 hectare, which is completely different from the US farming method. So of course, there are two different, apple and oranges in that sense. And it's impossible for Prime Minister Modi, given the sensitivity which you talked about, for us to open it up to the US world. But that being apart, I think on the other trade issues, and I think the representative on both sides have agreed on a framework, and I think they are working on that. And I'm very upbeat about the fact that both the partners who have converged on many other issues will certainly converge on the tariff. But on agriculture, India is going to hold out. That's my take.
Okay. Amanda, I want to get your take on the fairness and reciprocity question. I mean, I know the American perspective is America first, but we're talking about some desperately poor people. And Trump has put this out as if it's an equal playing field. We do to you what you do to us. Is that fair, though, in the context of a country like India, which, again, is a developing economy with a very high rate of poverty, especially when compared to the United States? And if you're looking at the defense industry, again, India trying to develop its own, and the U.S. looking at primarily selling, well, defense and agricultural products to a market that already has that built.
Well, having been to India myself and spent time in an area called Hyderabad, which a lot of people call it high tech Abad, they do have an industry there, and they've been developing that industry for over 3 decades now. So I don't think it's so fair to say is that they're developing, they can't do it on their own, and Trump's attacking them, or Trump's going after a very impoverished nation. I would just say that President Trump looks at every nation and sees where he can make it more equal for the United States. And that is something that he has campaigned on. And that's something that right now, the world and certainly Americans are being introduced to these new tariffs. And, kind of everyone's waiting here to see what actually happens in America. In our stores, our shelves going to be cleared off, as a lot of retailers have said to the president. But to answer your question about the defense industry in India and the agriculture industry, the tariff, and part of the reason why I think he calls him Prime Minister Modi tariff king, is because of the inequities in what you see. A 39% tariff versus what the US places, which is 4% in agricultural products. So that, as an example, is very obvious what it is. It is an imbalance. And when President Trump sees that, he says, we're going to have to make this more equal. There has to be more of a level playing field. And again, as we've discussed, President Trump and this administration and Prime Minister Modi, they have been trying to have this diplomatic, very open, very friendly relationship. And I think that what Prime Minister Modi is trying to do is to give up certain things so that they don't have to go after agriculture. But the reality remains their protectionism about agriculture, and President Trump continues to go after that.
Okay. Last couple minutes then. Quickly, Shashir, if there is an issue here with the U.S. playing India against China right now, especially in the lead up, to a potential meeting with President Xi, right now it seems that what China loses or could potentially lose, India is gaining, especially if an agreement is come to, and if we look at, for example, the realm of textiles in India. Textiles in India have lost a lot to China. Is that another way forward for India to, okay, maybe it will lose certain aspects of the defense industry with U.S. competition coming into the market, but is textile going to be the big gainers?
Look, can I just take you to manufacturing for a minute? Textiles would also come in manufacturing. I'm taking a line from Vice President Vance's speech. Make in America and make in India. He spoke about the two. The two are not really competitors. Both the economies can make each other's countries great by America increasing its manufacturing, and India also going down the path of manufacturing. Manufacturing ultimately gives jobs to people, which is primary concern for our Prime Minister. So make in America and make in India will go hand in hand. And while President Trump wants to reduce his trade deficit, who can blame him for that?
Okay.
But the But the relationship between India and US, yes, it's a trade relationship between our two countries is weighed in India's
Okay.
favor. But in the overall, we are a trade deficit country. So for my prime minister to balance his books is also important. Now
Okay.
coming to
I'll tell you
China,
what, we very quickly just have a final minute, so I need to give Sri Radha quick final words on that final question there. Go ahead.
China is always upset about what India does with anybody else. And when it comes to US, it's that much more, I would say, reactive. So whether it's on the trade issue or whether any other issue, of course, they're watching very closely. They are watching our Indo-Pacific activities closely. So here at this point of time, of course, I would think that when India and US are working on their trade deals, what we do with China is a completely separate matter altogether, because the engagement with China is of a different sort. Of course, China is our second largest trade partner, as everyone knows, but there has been a serious attempt by India to de-link, which hasn't really worked in the last couple of years that we worked on.
Okay.
But at the same time, we don't feel that way towards US. We are wanting to engage and work more closely with US on every other aspect, including trade.
Okay, that will have to be the final word for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of you so much for being with us, and our viewers, of course, for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.